For today's video, the paper I'm using is Arch's 140-pound rough press paper. It's on a block, which means the sides are glued down except for a small sliver on the top, which allows you to insert a palette knife so you can remove the paper. I chose a rough press cotton paper block because I'll be using a lot of wet and wet in this painting. The only bit of sketching I'm doing here before I start is to indicate with a light pencil mark where my foreground is and a couple of very light marks for the treetops. I then start with the wet and wet technique. I'm taking clean water and brushing it all over the sky area. I want my paper to be quite wet, but with no puddles. So you can see I'm just painting with the clean water all over. For now, I'm avoiding the ground, but I am painting in the center, even between those trees where the sunshine is coming through. And then I'm mixing up a light wash of phthalo blue. This is by QOR. And I'm using a broad sweeping brush stroke across the top of my paper to create these horizontal lines for the sky. And you can see I'm gradually watering the paint down as I come downward in the painting. I'm also adding a little bit of blue here in the center between the trees, very lightly, also suggesting some trees. Now I'm mixing up some quinacridone rose by Daniel Smith, and this is what I'm using to drop in some light pink clouds in the sky. And I'm just using a dabbing motion with my brush to create this fluffy effect with the clouds. Then I'm moving on to cadmium red and gradually adding some transparent orange into the sky. As we move downward in the sunset, the colors become much more vibrant. In between the trees, I'm carefully painting some of that orange. I want to make sure to leave some space for the trees to go. And then I'm adding some yellow into the sky, just dabbing that in. Be careful to make sure that your colors are a little bit lighter as you come towards the sunlight. We want it to almost look so bright that it could blind the viewer. Towards the bottom of the sunset here, I'm adding some downward streaks with the brush, just quick brush strokes suggesting the rays of sunshine. I'm using my quinacridone rose for the same effect, and then more carefully painting in these triangular shapes in between the sun rays. I'm using very light watered down paint. Now with a damp paper towel, I'm scrubbing out some of the paint from the center of the sunshine and then also pulling it up and out and away with a scrubbing motion. You'll want to make sure that you're using a clean, damp paper towel for this. Now for the foreground, we're going to use the wet and wet technique once again. I'm just painting all of the snow area in with water as well as the trees. The major trees and the snow are going to be the same color and value. So I'm using my Ultramarine by Daniel Smith to paint in the foreground, just using quick, broad, sweeping motions with my size 10 round brush. And then I'm mixing in a little of that quinacridone rose in the center where we see the sunlight reflecting on the snow, using a nice, vibrant pink color here. It will dry lighter, so don't be afraid to use bright colors. Then where the trees are going, I'm painting in that Ultramarine. Again, just kind of a solid wash here. Don't worry about making your brush strokes perfect. We're going to be covering that up with shadow shapes inside of the snow. And it might look a little strange right now thinking about snow as blue, but since it's in the shadow, it does need to be blue. So I'm painting on a little more carefully, wet on dry, the tops of the tree shapes overlapping the sky. And I like to use quick dabbing motions for those trees. I haven't switched to a smaller brush yet. I want to keep this painting fairly loose and suggestive. And you can see it's so much fun painting trees just using blotting motions with your brush. So there we've roughly painted on the trees, and I'm suggesting a couple of little ones here in the horizon line just beneath that sunshine. You can use more of a scrubbing dry brush technique to suggest some of the texture there. Once again, for the trees on the left side of the painting, I am using my Ultramarine, being more careful in the areas where we want to include more detail, but painting quickly and more washed out when the painting is not in the focal point. So here where we avoided those white areas for the trees, I'm carefully painting in with that blue. And you can see where the blue is overlapping the orange. It's not the most pretty color, and that's why we wanted to preserve some of those areas, because if you just paint blue right over the top of the orange, it's not going to be the color you want. Painting on those trees and leaving some white sky behind the trees. Very quickly scrubbing on the whole blocked in shape of those trees. And then since the foreground has dried quite a bit, we can go in with some dry brush techniques and create these almost suggestions of footprints in the foreground using a dry brush technique by scraping the brush across the surface. I'm using my paper towel once again to remove some of the blue paint, suggesting the overlap of sunshine rays coming across the trees. You'll want to make sure that you're using a good quality cotton paper that can stand this kind of scrubbing. If you're using a wood pulp-based paper, it's probably not going to withstand that kind of a beating. Now for the shadow shapes in the trees, I'm using my Daniel Smith Indigo and painting in all of the shadows in between where I see snow-covered branches. Now, if you feel like this video is moving maybe too fast, good news, this tutorial is available in real time. Just head over to emilyolsonart.com where you can access my growing library of over 60 full-length narrated online tutorials for just a small amount per month. Included with your membership is the Watercolor Jumpstart course, which is perfect if you're just starting out with watercolors. I'll include a link in the description below so you can check out all of the available tutorials. All right, let's get back to the video. So you can see I haven't switched to a smaller brush. I'm using still my very large round brush to paint all of these snow details. And even though we're just painting shadow shapes, it's amazing how it's starting to look like draped branches covered in heavy snow. And so you don't have to be exact. You don't have to follow your reference photo perfectly here. This is a very suggestive painting. It's very impressionistic. And you can see even on the trees on the far right and on the left, I'm being even less detailed and more exaggerated with my brush strokes, using broader brush strokes more with the belly side of the brush. And then as we move towards the center of the painting, which is the focal point, we want to be a little bit more careful with our brush strokes and paint with more detail. Always be thinking about where you want your viewers' eyes to be drawn. So in this case, of course, we want our viewers to be drawn to the chroma of that brilliant sunset and the brilliant sunshine in the center of the painting. As we move to the periphery, to the outskirts of the painting, we can brush aside some of those details. So I'm taking a broad wash of ultramarine here and just scrubbing it all across, creating almost a vignette of dark colors around the edges and around the corners of the painting. We just need to add a couple finishing details here. I'm using my Daniel Smith Quinacridone Rose, very watered down, and painting some pie sliver shapes. Again, suggesting and exaggerating those sun rays coming across. And then here I'm removing a little bit of paint in front of our trees, again to suggest the sunshine breaking across those trees. I felt like this side of the painting needed a few more pink clouds, so I've re-wet the paper with clean water and I'm dabbing in some more pink clouds and then covering those sun rays with a little bit of yellow. And then to make the treetops a little less symmetrical, I'm extending this one here so it's just a bit taller, giving it some more beautiful asymmetry. And there is our finished winter landscape. I hope you guys enjoyed this tutorial and I'll see you in the next video. Thanks for watching.